It's been about 1 year since I purchased my Harvest Right freeze dryer and then the video where we set it up together and did our first run. But I have learned so much in that 1 year and I wanted to share it with you today because it's really important that you know these things before you buy your first freeze dryer. Just a couple weeks ago, I put out a request on my YouTube community page asking you guys what you would be interested in knowing about the freeze dryer before you took the plunge. And we came up with about 6 questions. I'm going to answer them today. Everything from, is there really a good return on investment with these things, to what I wish I would have known before I bought it. So hang out with me today. I'm going to do a little inventory of the freeze-dried foods that I have been preserving over this last year while we talk about all the things you want to know. So the first question I always get asked is, what do I use the most? What freeze-dried foods do I freeze-dry the most? And what do I eat the most? Well, I really expected that the thing that I would use the most or freeze dry the most would be fruit and eat them as snacks. And I do, but I don't. Like, I have a whole jar. I have not only these Mylar bags, but I also have a lot of my freeze dried food in regular jars, like mason jars. This is more for long-term storage, and that's more for like what we're eating on a regular basis. This is my fruit bin right here. I have another one plus all of the mason jars. And while I did freeze dry a lot of fruit, I don't eat them as snacks. I think like when my nieces and nephews are over, they do eat them as snacks, like the strawberries and the mulberries and freeze-dried watermelon. You guys, so good. But me personally, I don't eat it. I don't eat it that way. What I do is I powder it. So there's a lot of these in here, like strawberry banana, where I took the strawberries and the bananas and I put them in a blender and I blended it down into a powder. And that's what I use in my smoothies. I used to keep all of my berries and my bananas and my yogurt and stuff like that in the freezer, and then I would blend it up and I would make my smoothies that way. And it's good, that is good, but I just don't have that much freezer space. So I didn't have enough space to hold all of those berries. So instead, what I started doing is making them into a powder. So I used to combine them all together into like one smoothie. So I'd put the berries, the bananas, and the yogurt all on one tray and freeze dry it. And then I would put it into one jar or one Mylar bag. And then I realized that some days I really want more banana than strawberry, and some days I want a mixed, smoothie, like maybe some pineapple and mango, maybe a watermelon smoothie without banana. So I started, freeze drying them separately, powdering them separately, and now I keep them in separate packs and separate jars. And that is probably the #1 way that I have been using it, is these smoothies. And I am now obsessed with smoothies. I didn't used to be, but ever since I started freeze drying, I definitely have gotten obsessed with smoothies. I really like the fact that I can freeze dry the yogurt, which is just next level, so good, tastes the same, like everything tastes exactly the same. Whether I made my smoothie from frozen, from fresh, or from freeze dried, you can't tell. I can't tell. I don't know anybody can tell. I give it to my nieces, my nephews, my sister. She can't tell. Nobody can tell that it came from a powder. It's so good. The other thing that I use most often, which wasn't really a surprise, I kind of knew that we were going to do this, was going to be eggs. And I have those down there. We knew one of the big reasons why we wanted to do this was so that we could, keep vegetables from the garden, because a lot of the times we were running out of space. I don't necessarily like them canned all the time. Not all vegetables. There's certain vegetables I do and some that I don't. And so we had the excess from the garden, but we also had this situation that was happening where eggs just kept going up and down. And this has been going on for years, right? The price of eggs has been pretty wild swings for years. And so we thought, well, when eggs are down, when the price comes back down, we're gonna freeze dry eggs, because I hear that they are pretty amazing freeze dried. By the way, they are. Like, they taste just like regular eggs. Now, they are like scrambled eggs. You're not gonna get like a fried egg out of these. That doesn't hold up because it does turn into like a powder. But they do pretty much behave just like scrambled eggs, like raw scrambled eggs. I don't cook mine ahead of time. Mine are straight raw eggs. And we do 60 at a time. We buy the 60 pack and we buy that at a time. Now, if I had chickens, the return on investment here would probably be pretty good in being able to keep them, keep eggs in the house pretty much all year round and without purchasing them. But I do have to purchase my eggs because I don't have chickens. Maybe one day. So we definitely dig into our raw egg pack when the prices get pretty crazy. And so that's what we've been using a decent amount, but then we'll go long stretches when egg prices aren't very high, and we will purchase our eggs and we will keep these for a rainy day. One of the areas that I didn't expect to freeze dry that we ended up using way more than I ever anticipated was mashed potatoes. It makes sense to me now that I've been freeze drying for a while. So potatoes here, white potatoes specifically, they're storage ability here in Florida is not good. Like, we can usually store them for about 3 or 4 months and then they start sprouting on us because it's very warm in our homes. We don't have cold weather, we don't have cold rooms, and we don't have basements. Believe it or not, here in Florida there's no basements. I think we're too low to the water table, so we don't have basements. So we don't have any particular area in our home where we can keep, you know, these cool crops that like to stay in cool environments, like onions, garlic, potatoes. So they tend to sprout on us a little bit quicker, and potatoes are one of those that sprout really fast. So usually when I harvest my potatoes, I can keep them fresh for about 2-3 months, and then I have to start figuring out what to do with them. So in the past, that's always been blanched and froze, either scalloped or diced or fry form or something like that. Or you could chop them up and can them. That's been an option. I'm not really crazy about that way. It kind of just has like a weird texture when it comes out. You could dehydrate them if you wanted to and make potato flakes. Well, what I've been doing is I'll make a huge batch of mashed potatoes. Huge batch of mashed potatoes with all the things we love in it, right? So butter, cream, sour cream, like you can do cream cheese, like all of the dairies. I put cheese in it. I put salt, pepper, garlic seasoning. We really doctor them up. And I lay them on trays and we freeze dry them. And then when they come out of the freeze dryer, we break them into a little bit smaller pieces and we put them in the Mylar bags. Now, I don't have any that I can show you today because we've eaten them all. I actually stopped putting them in Mylar bags because we use them so quickly. And a lot of the times, you know, the Mylar bags are something that you can't reuse over and over like you can the glass jars. These are mainly for things that we're gonna hold on to for a longer period of time. So I usually will do a couple bags of Mylar and then you know, the rest in glass jars. Well, when it comes to mashed potatoes from here on out, I will only be putting them in glass jars because we go through them so fast. Mashed potatoes is like amazing, but really it's anything like that. So another one that's kind of like that is guacamole. So I had a really good harvest of my avocado tree, but avocados don't last long and they take up too much space in the freezer when you have your own tree and it's producing like ridiculous amounts of avocados. I learned on the forums that guacamole does better than actually sliced avocado. So I went ahead and made guacamole. What does it have? Tomatoes, onions, peppers, garlic, lime juice, and then the avocados, I think salt, pepper, you know, the seasonings. I think that might be it. And we mashed that all together and I freeze dry it in trays. Thankfully, the way that I freeze dry it so that the guacamole doesn't change color, because I want it to be that nice bright green, is I will, when I put it on the tray, I immediately put plastic wrap on the tray so that it's touching the top of the guacamole, and then I freeze it. So it keeps it from oxidizing from the air. And then once it's frozen and you peel that off, you just pull it and put it straight in the freeze dryer, and I've never had a problem. It stays nice, bright green, pretty guacamole. And when you add water back to it to rehydrate it, it is so perfect. It's exactly like the day you put it in. Tastes exactly the same. There's no like old taste. There's no like metallic taste from the Mylar. There's no, you know, weird grit or anything like that. Like, it's really very, very good. Another one that was kind of not really a surprise, I guess I always thought that we would get to this, but we got to it much faster, was things like soups, stews. Think of mashed potatoes and guacamole, that kind of texture that you get, but add things like you know, rice, like if you're going to do a chicken and rice stew or a pot pie stew or a chili. Chili is exceptional. Like I love doing chili on our freeze dryer. So those types of meals, like casserole meals, that's the best way I know how to explain it. If it has pasta, rice, potatoes, any of that stuff, it's really, really good. And it's got like that thicker texture. And when you break it apart into pieces, like there's not like huge distinguishable pieces of food, you know, like that does really well in the freeze dryer, I think. It does, and it rehydrates really well and it tastes amazing. So let's move on to the next question. What do I wish I knew before I bought my freeze dryer? And I think this one's a really important one because there's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of kind of education you have to do through this process. And hopefully you do it before and not after so that you're not like wasting food, because you can ruin some food if you don't know some of these things. So the first thing that I think that people don't talk about enough, or maybe that the company doesn't talk about, is that when this machine turns off and it's like, hey, your freeze-dried food is ready, it will tell you. It goes through all this whole process. It's all these different steps that it goes through. But there's a point in time when it stops and it's like, oh, your food's done. That's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true. So it's not done when it says it's done. Probably, it's usually, I don't think it's ever been done when it says it's done. So that's probably one of the things that I wish I would have known before, because you can ruin a lot of food if you don't know this little trick. So there's a few ways that people really do determine that their food is done. So one of the ways in which I do is I weigh my trays. So when it says that it's done, before it actually finishes, I will pause the machine, I will take it out, I'll take each one of the trays and I will weigh the tray on my little kitchen scale that I have here. This one's pretty accurate. I would definitely suggest getting a kitchen scale that goes down in grams to the 10th degree, so to the first decimal point. So don't just do like 10 grams. It needs to be 10.5 grams. So you need to get down to that 0.5 or 0.1. I think it's 10th, right? 100, 10th? I wish math was my strong suit. But you want that first decimal point so that you can really observe how much the food is losing in weight. So what you do, right before the machine says, oh, we're almost done, you pause the machine. It's something called extra dry time. You pull your trays out, you weigh them, you put them back in for more dry time. So it's like extra dry time. And you set the machine for that, and then you run it for at least 4 hours. I always do at minimum 4 hours. And then you pause the machine again, you pull it out, you check the weight, and you see if it's losing weight. If it's still losing weight, that means it's still losing water from inside of the food. And you need almost all of this water to come out. So if it's losing weight, it's not done yet. And so you just keep doing that every 4 hours. I've gotten to a point now, it's just like anything else in life, right? If you've done it enough times, you kind of have an experience with it. So I know that berries, generally, I won't do the every 4 hours. It will say it's almost done, and I will put 12 hours on the clock, and I'll come back in 12 hours, and that's when I'll start weighing them. That's how off this machine is when it says things are done. It can be another 12 or 24 hours before this stuff is actually done losing the weight so that it holds. Now, if you pull it out before it's done losing weight, it will, you'll put it in your bags, you'll put it in your jar, and over time, because it had some moisture in there, that moisture is going to reabsorb into some of the other food, and then it's going to soften, and then it's going to rot or ferment, and it's not going to be good, and it will ruin the whole pack of food. In fact, it'll ruin the entire 10 pounds of food that you did in your machine if that's a medium machine. So you really have to make sure that it's done. Some people like to use, what is it? It's a infrared type gun or whatever. It measures the moisture levels in the food using like a gun. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know. Anyway, it's a little like moisture meter basically, but you don't stick it in the food. You kind of laser over the top of it and it tells you cold spots, and that's how you do it. But I find the weight method is like a really cost-effective way to do it, and I've never had a problem. Once I see that it's no longer losing weight, I honestly will just put it in for another 4 to 8 hours. It depends. If I'm going to bed, I'll just let it run overnight again and then come back in and do it. So that's probably one of the biggest learning curves that they don't talk about that much. It's just making sure that your food is actually dry. And so that's kind of a negative thing of what I learned. But let me tell you a positive thing that I learned, which is that it is so incredibly easy to freeze dry. Like, it's unlike canning, it's unlike dehydrating, it's unlike all of the different other ways to preserve, because it is just so simple. Right? So there's only a couple rules when it comes to freeze drying. So first, don't do sugar or syrup, like maple syrup, honey, those really high density sugars. Don't do that. But you can do some levels of jam. Like if you were going to make a cookie and you put jam in it, you can mix that together. And then there's the other side, which is don't do too much fat, right? So you're not going to freeze dry butter, and you can't freeze dry tallow or anything like that because it's just straight fat. Right? You have to kind of mix those things in. So if you had like a pot roast, you could do a pot roast that has some fat on it, but you do want to kind of cut the amount of fat from it because fat can go rancid. Even if you pull all the moisture out of it, fat does still go rancid. Small amounts, like adding a little bit, like a tablespoon of butter to, an entire machine's worth of stuff is going to be fine. But doing like large amounts or leaving fat on your steaks and you're doing your steak in there, or not rinsing your ground beef when you're, doing like a chili, like those are going to cause some issues. Besides that fat and, straight sugar, you can do anything. You can do meat, you can do seafood, you can do dairy, you can do pastas, you can do rice. Some of the stuff that you can't do in the canning world, you can do in here. You can do broccoli, you can do cauliflower, all those things. And there's not any like special rules. Like you don't have to follow a menu. I think this was the biggest thing and was so hard for me. And I know that it's been hard for a few others because I get a question a lot like, hey, can you send me your recipe for your chili? Or send me the recipe that you follow for your raw eggs. Guys, it is literally like make the chili however you like how you normally do. Just try to reduce the fat or use a low fat meat. And then just slap it on some trays and throw it in here. That's it. Eggs. Just scramble your eggs, slap it on some trays and throw it in here. Like it is so super simple. It is just so easy that you don't have to think about it. And for me, when it is harvest season in the garden, I just have a ton of harvesting and preserving work that I need to be doing, canning and breaking out the book and spending hours, standing in front of this pressure canner and you're like doing all the things. It can get overwhelming. Like there's just a lot going on. It's a busy time of year. But having a freeze dryer, if you just can't get to something and you're like, hey, I want to make a tomato sauce, but I don't want to use Ball's tomato sauce. I want to use the one that I like. Yeah, make your tomato sauce and slap it on some trays, stick it in a freeze dryer and turn it into a powder. And then you just add water later and you get your spaghetti sauce. It is just so simple, and you don't need a recipe. All the recipes that you already use are what you're going to use. The next question I get a lot is like maintenance, storage, electricity, kind of the everyday type things that you're going to have to deal with. So maintenance wise, the only thing that I would ever have to do is change the oil. I know it sounds like complicated. It is the simplest thing ever. I wish I would have recorded it the last time I did it, but my little vacuum is right here and the oil is like super simple. You just unscrew a thing, it kind of pours out, you screw it back in, you pour new oil in. It's super simple. The machine tells you when you need to do it. You don't got to really think about it. And it is a really, really simple process. I can do it. I don't even make my husband do it. Typically, those types of things that we do in our home, he's usually the one that has to do it. But for me, I'm like, oh, this is so simple. So if I can do it, you can do it. Trust me. And you only have to do it with the Premier pump, which is the newer pump that they make, which I think is the only one they sell now. They do an oil-free pump and the Premier pump, and I think that's it. There used to be another pump that you had to change to oil more frequently. But the Premier pump, I think it's like every 20 runs. So it depends on how often you're using it. I use mine about once a week. So once a week, I only change the oil like, twice a year. It's not very much. And you can filter your oil if you don't want to buy brand new oil. They send you a filter so you can filter it and reuse your filtered oil. It's really up to you whether you want to do that or not. I have filtered before. It doesn't seem any different. But when I'm doing stuff that has like strong smells, like my garlics and my onions, sometimes I will filter the oil or actually replace it altogether, depending on if I'm going to be doing like berries next, because you don't want garlic strawberries. It's weird. So that's pretty much the only maintenance besides cleaning. So in between runs, I will wipe it down, and then maybe once every 3 months or so, I'll come in here with some vodka or some rubbing alcohol, and I will wipe down the trays, and I will wipe down the inside of the barrel, and the glass. I will take the ring off, and I will rinse off the ring with that kind of stuff, and then I just put it all back together. Really, really simple. In terms of storage, if you haven't noticed, this is actually my spare bedroom. This is where we keep ours. I know a lot of people like to put theirs in their garage or their basements. We don't have basements here in Florida, and our garages are very hot. So there's only about 2, maybe 3 months a year where our garages are not like obnoxiously hot. So I would only be able to run it a couple times a year if I left it in my garage, because this thing does get a little warm. We keep our house at like 72, and when I'm running this, I leave the door open. Some people put fans on it. I've never had to do that. Mine's never overheated, and I think it's because we do keep our house at 72 degrees. But with the door open, and this room tends to be one of the cooler rooms, I've never had an issue with it overheating in here. Also, this room doesn't get like super hot when it's running. It is a few degrees warmer. So if it's 72 in the rest of the house, it's probably like 75, 76 in here. It's a little bit warmer because this thing does put off a little bit of heat, especially through the side here where the vents are. So just think about that where you're gonna put it. It's also really loud. There's no getting around this, guys. It is louder than a dishwasher. It's quieter than a generator. If you live here in Florida, like, you're familiar with generators, right? We use those during hurricane season. Yeah, it's probably one of the more loud appliances in the home. We only run it when no one's here, hence why it's in our spare bedroom. Like, if we were having guests, we wouldn't be running this. And I always make sure that if we are expecting guests, like, I make sure that anything that I need to run is run in advance of them coming here, and then, I run it after they leave. And it's in our spare bedroom, so if it's too loud, I just shut the door, and then you can barely hear it. It's really when the pump comes on, so there's the refrigeration side of this, which is getting this really cold. It's actually like a freezer. That has a little bit of sound to it, kind of like a refrigerator would, but the sound comes in when the vacuum comes. So usually it will refrigerate for a while or freeze for a while, and then the vacuum will start, and that's what kind of does the process of freeze drying. It pulls a vacuum inside here. The vacuum is loud. If I were to compare it, it's really hard to compare it to something because I can't think of anything. And this is probably only going to make sense for some of us who've been around for a while. But those first and second generation dishwashers, you know how loud those things were? That's kind of how loud this thing is, especially when the vacuum pulls. That's how loud it is. Like an air conditioner, like an outside air conditioner, kind of inside. That's what it kind of sounds like. It's got some noise to it, guys. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It's a little loud. Now, electricity. Right, so this is kind of like an air conditioner mixed with a freezer, mixed with a vacuum. It has a very big draw for electrical. First, let's talk about what you need. So if you have a small or a medium, this is a medium, it has 5 trays, it holds about 10 pounds of food. You can get away with a little bit more than that, maybe 12 pounds at each run. It's just the typical plug, but what you don't want to do is you don't want a surge protector on it. You don't want other things on it. You preferably don't want it in a room that has a lot of other stuff going on. So I would never put this in a kitchen, because a kitchen you're using all the time. You're running a microwave, you're running a stove, you're running a refrigerator, and some of those things might be on the same line, electrical line, as what you're going to put this thing on. And on top of that, it's just loud. Putting it in the kitchen, you'd never be able to hear yourself think. Right, so in my spare room, when nobody else is here, this electrical line, my husband's more familiar with it, but if you go out to your panel and you look at your panel, you can see the different lines, right? So you might have the spare room linked with the hall closet, you know? You might have your kitchen linked with your laundry room. Like, all of that will show on your panel which rooms are where. And you want to stick this in a place where it's not going to have a huge draw of electricity with other things. Hence one of the reasons why we don't run it when people are staying here, because people could be using the TV, they could be charging their phones. Not that that's really that's not gonna like trip it. It's not gonna trip the breaker. But you do kind of want it on its own dedicated breaker. So you just want to put it in a room where you're not going to be running a lot of other things in that particular room or on that particular line. Now, if you went up to the large or the extra large, yeah, you're going to have to call an electrician out because they have to run, I think, like a 220. It's kind of the same thing that a refrigerator uses or a stove uses. They use a different type of outlet. That would be what you would have to do if you got one of the large or the extra large. But for the small and the medium, you don't have to do that. You use a regular plug outlet. Now, how much electricity does it use? I did that calculation based on how much I pay for electricity. Now, where I live, it's like 9 cents per kilowatt. So it's pretty low. I think the national average is 15. So in 1 year, if I use this machine once a week, usually it takes like 2 days, let's call it 40 hours. That means I'm going to spend probably about $300 a year running this. I think it was $336 a year running this if I run it once a week, and it runs for 2 days. And it's 9 cents a kilowatt hour. That's what it came out to, 336. So if your kilowatt hour is a little bit more than 9 cents, it's gonna cost you a little bit more. If you don't run it as often, maybe you only do it once a month, or maybe you do it during harvest season and you run it the rest of the year. Like, that's gonna vary how much it's gonna cost. It does have a little bit of a cost, like $300 a year is not cheap. But when you factor in other preserving methods like canning and stuff, you're using electricity there, you're using equipment like jars and the canners and things like that. So, I mean, if you used a freezer and you bought an extra deep freezer, it's going to be using electricity. I don't think it's going to use as much as this one does. This one does use a little bit more electricity than like a deep freezer would, but a deep freezer runs all year round. This guy runs when you need it. So it's, the pros and cons. So the electrical cost for me, if you take $336 divided by 12, that's an extra $28 a month on my electric bill, which for me, it was not even really noticeable. I didn't notice the $20 or $30. The next question I get a lot are like pros and cons. Does the pros outweigh the cons? So the cons are gonna be probably the biggest con, and the ones that most people talk about, is that this thing is expensive. This is a very high startup cost. I think I checked it recently, and I think it's $3,019 for the medium, for the one that I have with the Premier pump. But you can wait for them to have sales. They do have sales a lot, so make sure to check that out, because wait for one of their sales. They're typically around the holidays. Sometimes they have them during preservation season, which for most of the country, not here in Florida, but for most of the country, that's like fall, or late spring, early fall. So you'll want to kind of look for the sales, because you can usually get $500 off, which brings it down to a little bit cheaper of a cost. And sometimes they even do bigger specials than that, where you can do that plus, additional discount codes, free shipping, all those things. Look for those if you want it. And if you want to help support my channel, if this video has been helpful to you, I would really appreciate it if you would use my link. I have it down in the description. It just kind of helps with some of the costs of the channel. So if you wanted to do that, I would be so incredibly grateful, guys. Thank you so much for doing that. It doesn't have a cost to you. You're going to pay the same cost regardless. It just gives me a little bonus. So I'll put that down in the description. Make sure to use my code. The other con is going to be that it costs money to run this, like we talked about, the electricity, that $30 a month. And then the other cost is what you're going to store them in, right? So if you're going to use Mylar, you have to have oxygen absorbers. If you're more of a canner and you've been canning, you can use your canning jars. You can use the half gallons. You can use the quarts, whatever size you want. You're still going to probably want to get oxygen absorbers, especially if you're going to keep it for years and not just 1 year. If it's 1 year, I go without an oxygen absorber. But oxygen absorber, Mylar bags, all that stuff, that has a cost too. I probably spend, I think it's like $50 in Mylar bags and like $20 in oxygen absorbers a year. So that's not too bad, but still add that with the electricity plus the machine. Yeah, that's the biggest con, is that this thing is expensive. Now, the biggest pro I would say on the other side is just how incredibly good the food tastes. It is not like canning. So when I talk about canning, there's some recipes that I absolutely love canned. I love the spaghetti sauce that I make. I love all of the jams and the jellies and the pie fillings and pickled beans and pickled cucumbers. Like, I am into it. There's a lot of stuff I don't like. You know, when you can meat, sometimes the meat can have a weird flavor. You can't can certain things, right? They have to be in very specific recipes, and those recipes have to be tested. And sometimes they don't taste all that great. You can change the seasoning, but sometimes, you know, I don't know. It's just weird sometimes. Like, sometimes the food, it's very mushy, all the same consistency, but when you get into freeze drying, it is not the same. Like, this is my unstuffed peppers. It's basically like a deconstructed stuffed pepper. You could do a constructed, you know, stuffed pepper as well. Just try to make them smaller in a freeze dryer. And you would rehydrate the peppers, and the peppers are crispy. It's so good. Rehydrate your green beans and they are crispy. Rehydrate your carrots and they're crispy, but you don't get the same thing when you do that in canning. If you do that with dehydrating, say you dehydrate some carrots and you try to rehydrate them, if you've ever done that, you know they rehydrate, but not the same. It's kind of like a raisin. It's got like that leathery feel to it, but it's not actually, it's not like a grape again. Whereas these guys, like, if you freeze dry a strawberry and then you rehydrate it, it tastes like a strawberry. It has the same like crunch, the seeds, everything. It has that same mouth feel, the same taste. And probably the number one thing, one of the reasons why we absolutely adore our freeze dryer is because it holds on to most of the nutrition. Because it's not like cooking the food. In canning and in dehydrating, you're really cooking the food, you're heating it. And heat tends to cause the loss of some nutrients. But freeze drying has a very minimal heating element, and it's mainly just to cause the liquid to sublimate. I think it's sublimate. I can't say the word. But basically the water to release from the food and make it into the air and vaporize it. So it's very minimal heat, and that heat doesn't kill much of the nutrients in the food. So it's got a rate of about 90% of the nutrients stay in the food. So when you're eating it, not only does it taste just as good as the day you put it in, but it has 90% of the nutrition that it had when you cooked it, when you freeze dried it, all the things. So for us, that makes so much more sense when you're talking about, you know, herbs, oh my gosh, guys, if you're growing your own herbs like basil, and then you've ever tried to dehydrate basil or air dry basil, it like loses its flavor. Like it loses its pretty green and it loses its flavor. You stick it in a freeze dryer, it tastes just like basil, just like fresh basil. It is incredible. So one of the other cons, now that we talked about one of the pros and one of the cons, is storage, right? So I didn't think about this before I bought it, which was like, where are we gonna store the food? Because it does take up some space. Once you start freeze drying, it becomes kind of addictive and you kind of end up freeze drying a lot of stuff. So where do you store all this stuff? In the Mylars, and you know, we get these little bins from Walmart, I think is where we got these from. They kind of fit them perfectly, and when we put them in the top of our pantry, and that has worked for us, but I can see us quickly running out of space. So that has been something that has, you know, been something that I'm still working on to figure out the perfect way to store this stuff. It's easier than storing canning, I will say that. I guess it's easier than storing freezer too, because you don't have to have another freezer. And it stays pretty organized this way. I don't know. It's just, they take up a lot of room. I think all of, whenever you grow your own food and you know, want to have enough food for a year so that you're shopping in your own house rather than, you know, shopping at the store, you're gonna need space for that. And whether that's under the beds or in a closet or building a pantry, I think that's always gonna be a common issue. Now, on the flip side, another pro, food waste is almost non-existent in my house. So there's been times where we've had really great harvests out in the garden and I don't have anywhere to put it. Like, I don't have enough freezer space. I don't have enough canning jars. I either have to go buy some more canning jars, or we just like give it to our friends' chickens, or we compost it. And that always drives me crazy. I want to be able to save this food. Well, now we have a different way of handling it, which is freeze drying into powders. So we had one year where I had an incredible greens harvest. Like I had so many greens and I was like, what am I gonna do with all these greens? I could, you know, get some chickens, which I would love, but we're not ready for that right now. And then the chickens could eat the greens. But instead what I did was I freeze dried all of these greens and I, you know, blended it down into a powder. And now you could put that in anything. Smoothies, you could throw it in some soups. You can treat it like a seasoning and just kind of put it all over your food. And because it holds 90% of the nutrition, you know, you're basically adding greens into all of these foods and you don't even notice it because it's like a powder. You know, 1 or 2 tablespoons of this powder is like a whole bowl of spinach. So you're really getting a lot of nutrition. If you're a parent and you just have a kid that won't eat their greens or won't eat their vegetables, you know, taking a couple tablespoons of green powder and throwing it in some spaghetti sauce, or into your batter if you're making like chicken nuggets and stuff. It's a great way to sneak them in there, man. And you don't taste it and you don't notice it. And so I think that is number one. And if you're into medicinals, because I really love growing medicinal plants, one of my favorite is moringa. I'll freeze dry moringa, turn that into a powder, and then you can put that into capsules and swallow it as pills. Like there's so many things you can do because it does hold on to so much of the nutrients. So the next question I always get is, how do we use the food? So a lot of the times we use it in our everyday cooking. So I will keep, you know, jars of zucchini and I'll put this in some zucchini bread when I want to make some zucchini bread. Or say, for example, we need some eggs. I'll just grab a couple tablespoons of eggs and use that. Or our favorite, mashed potatoes. Just grab this, and we want mashed potatoes at night. Grab this, throw a couple tablespoons of water in here until it gets to the right consistency, and there's our side. Heat it up, you know. Tomato powder. I want to make tomato paste, or I want to make spaghetti sauce, or tomato juice, or whatever that's tomatoes. I just take some tomato powder, add some liquid to it. If you want to look at medicinals, I have some turmeric here. Spritz a little water on this and then throw it into my fire cider. I have turmeric and ginger, so I can put it in my fire cider and make my medicinal. Whole Brussels sprouts, you know, all freeze dried. There's also squash. You know, if it's not our season this time of year when I want to have squash, but there's not any squash growing in the garden, I have some sliced squash that I can use here. That's probably the primary way that we eat a lot of our freeze-dried food, but another way that we use a lot of our freeze-dried food is with camping. So we do RV trips every single year. We go camping for 2 to 3 months a year. And during that 2 to 3 months, like sometimes we're out on a trail or we're, you know, hiking or whatever, and we want to eat. It's a lot easier to carry around freeze-dried food and just add some hot water to it, or even cold water. It doesn't have to be hot. And you can eat straight out of the Mylar bag. Besides camping and every day, you know, we make smoothies out of the powders. I use herbs. I use a lot of herbs to season our food, and I do that freeze dried so I can grow the herb during my season of growing, and then I don't have to grow it the rest of the year. I don't have to be trying to keep these plants alive during, for us, it's summer. Summer is hard here in Florida to grow food, but for other people up north, it might be during winter. You can't, you know, you're trying to limp along a basil plant in a windowsill where it's just too cold. You know, like, you can freeze dry your basil from your harvest during spring, and you can just use that the rest of the year, and it tastes exactly the same. One of the things I absolutely love to do is batch cooking, so that I don't have to cook every day. As much as I love cooking, I don't want to cook every single day. So I will batch cook. I will make a huge amount of chili, and usually we eat that for a couple days, and then I throw some on trays and stick them in the freezer. And then when I have a full set of 5 trays ready, I will throw that into the freeze dryer. And then what that does is I have freeze dried, you know, chili for when we want to eat that in a couple months later. You know, maybe it's in the winter and I don't want to break out my, you know, canned soups or canned chilies, or maybe we went through all these and I can just break out my freeze-dried stuff. Works great. The last question I always get asked is the return on investment. So there's two ways to calculate return on investment when it comes to freeze drying. So you can calculate whether freeze drying at home is cheaper than buying freeze dried food. So if you are someone who, I don't know, prepper, survivalist, camper, and you buy a lot of freeze dried meals or freeze dried fruit or something like that, and you want to compare freeze drying at home compared to buying those packages, without a doubt, you can break even and get back all your investment in 4 months of freeze drying. Because when you compare freeze dried food that you purchase versus freeze dried food that you make, based on the calculation that I did, it's about $25 a pound for purchased freeze dried food. But for me, to make my own freeze-dried food, it's only $7.19 a pound. That's taking into account my initial investment for the machine, my Mylar bags, my oxygen absorbers, the electrical cost, the amount that I spend on food, right, to put in the freeze dryer. So I usually freeze dry out of my garden, but if I were to buy meats and eggs and things like that, because I don't have chicken and I don't raise our own beef here, and I put that in the freezer, taking all that into account, we're still only talking $7.19 a pound of food, as opposed to $25 a pound for food that you buy freeze dried. So in that case, it does make a significant savings. It's 190% of a return on investment in 4 months. Now, I don't think a lot of people fall into that bucket, but if you do, just rest assured you're going to make back that money so quickly. I think it comes out to $9,200 a year. So $10,000 you could be saving if that is your situation. I think most of us fall into the other situation, which is I didn't buy a lot of freeze-dried food before I got my freeze dryer. I think I maybe got bananas and strawberries on occasion as a snack. I didn't purchase a lot of freeze-dried mountain meals or anything like that. So what is the return on investment if you're buying it and you want to compare it to fresh food? This is much more difficult of a calculation, but I basically had to figure out the cost of food, fresh food, which in general, and this is a huge generality, it's about $2 a pound. When you take into account meat, dairy, eggs, vegetables, fruits, it comes out to about $2 a pound. Based on running my machine once a week and how much food it can process once a week in weight, it's about 520 pounds a year that I can do at $2 a pound. That's $1,040 that I can generate in fresh food. When you take into account the cost of the machine plus, running the machine, the electricity, the Mylar bags, all of those things, you're not going to hit a break-even point in your ROI until you get to the 11th year of owning it. That is not a great return on investment. I'm just going to be completely transparent here, guys. You would have to own your machine for over 10 years in order to finally make money on it. Now, there are some caveats here, right? I grow my own garden, so the cost of food for me was probably less than $2 a pound, right? It's probably much less because a lot of the stuff that I freeze dry is from my garden. So you kind of do have to, it gets more complex when you take into the cost of how much it costs me to garden. I have some videos on that, return on investment for gardening, so you check that out. So you have to kind of calculate in, how much did it cost me to build my garden over a period of years that I've had it, the 10 years that I've been growing food, how much I spend annually on seeds and fertilizer, and then how much I get in yield that I don't spend at the grocery store, and then factor in the cost of the freeze drying. It gets really complicated, so I was trying to keep it a little bit high level by thinking of overall costs. But I probably can reduce that down by a couple years by growing a lot of my own food. Now, if you have your own chickens, raise your own chickens, maybe you raise goats, maybe you raise meat rabbits, maybe you have a full-blown homestead where you raise a lot of your own food. If you're doing that, obviously that there's a cost to raising those animals and caring for those animals. So that factors in just like the garden factors in the cost of growing a garden. But the flip side is, you're usually saving money by doing these things yourself, maybe butchering yourself, collecting the eggs, maybe growing some of the fodder for the chickens. Like there's a lot of things that you could do to reduce the cost. And you could bring down the cost of the machine, making the ROI closer to maybe the 5 or 6 year mark versus the 11-year mark. But for a typical suburban person who maybe doesn't garden, doesn't raise their own animals, it's going to take 11 years. It's going to take 11 years to get your return on investment. And I know that there's a lot of people who started freeze drying way back in the day that still have their freeze dryers. I hear from them all the time in some of the Facebook groups and stuff that they have been running it for over 10 years and they're still having just the same results that I get running it for 1 year. So I know that the machine will last that length of time. It's just, that's a long time to wait for a return on investment. So I really do think that it takes more than just saving money to buy one of these machines. If you are only looking at preserving, using a freeze dryer to save money, and you don't raise your own animals, you don't have your own garden, and you're not comparing it to freeze-dried food that you normally purchase, then yeah, it doesn't make sense to get a freeze dryer. It's not gonna be saving you money. Now, if you have some of those added factors, like your garden, raising chickens, you buy a lot of freeze-dried food, or maybe you're into camping and the convenience of having, lighter food that you can take with you camping, that's one reason. Maybe you absolutely hate the taste of canned food, right? I kind of live in that camp a little bit. We go camping, plus I'm not always thrilled with the results of canned food. So for me, it made sense from a purely, I want to maintain the taste and texture of my food. I want to enjoy my food. So it made sense for me to save up and purchase one of these. Maybe you're into like medicinal plants and you don't want to grow like this giant garden of all medicinal plants, and you want to grow just a few plants every year and then take that huge harvest, freeze dry it, and then you could have the freeze dried for 10 years and you only have to grow the plant once every 10 years. It's a convenience factor. Then there's people that use their machine, they get it for all of the reasons that I've mentioned, and then they also freeze dry stuff to sell. You can create a business. There's a lot of like freeze-dried candy, freeze-dried fruit. You could go in half with somebody else, right? So this was something I considered, where you go in and you and your best friend or you and your neighbor split the cost of the machine, and it lives at one of you guys' houses and the other person can come and use it whenever they want. Like you can split it up that way, and that makes it easier. You can get in on a group where maybe you're the one who purchases the machine and you have a group of friends that sends you stuff that they want freeze-dried, from candy to fruits to camping meals or whatever, and then they pay you for that on a regular schedule. Like there's a lot of different ways. Maybe you have a farmer's market stand and you sell your fruits and vegetables, and maybe you want to add some cool medicinal stuff or freeze-dried fruits or whatever. Like it can be used to make a business, because like I mentioned earlier, freeze-dried food costs about $25 a pound, depending. That's overall, guys, right? Candy might be cheaper. Meat tends to be the more expensive. Like if you're doing the Mountain House meals, those tend to be more expensive. So you could be making a killing using your freeze dryer if you want to start a business with it, or already have a business and you want to supplement with it. So it's a bigger picture, I think, to discuss when we talk about return on investment. But if you're just sticking to the basics and you want to compare it to fresh food versus freeze-dried food, yeah, it's going to take 11 years for a return on investment. So the bottom line is, would I buy this again, knowing everything that I've known over the past year of freeze drying? 1000% I totally would. I am in love with my freeze dryer. My canned items have slowly been decreasing. My dehydrating items are pretty much non-existent at this point. I am using my freeze dryer for probably about 50% of all my preservation activities, and that is slowly increasing every single month. I am switching something from canning to freeze drying. It, for me, has been a game changer in terms of ease of use, flavor, texture, nutrition, like in all the ways, it is superior to all the different preservation methods. And I don't say that lightly, because I do all of those other activities. Fermenting like is really good for like gut bacteria and stuff like that. You can't do that in a freeze dryer. So I think there are always going to be some ways that I am going to can things versus freeze dryer. Like jam, you won't do straight jam in there because it's just too much sugar, too much sweetener. But you could do fruit and then turn the fruit into jam later. Like it's a whole world that opens up to you that gives you a lot of options. And it's not so restrictive as other ways of preserving. So for me, it's like number one, and it's just super convenient. So I would totally, if this thing broke tomorrow, I would buy another one. But thankfully, I've never had any issues with it whatsoever. I've never had to even reach out to the company, but I have heard others who have had issues with theirs. Thankfully, my husband's very handy, and he probably could fix anything. He used to be in heating and air conditioning, so he probably could fix anything that I had a problem with, but I've never had a problem with it. It has always kicked off exactly the way that it always has supposed to kick off, and it's always freeze-dried exactly how it does. In the next 10 years that it's going to take me to get the return on investment, yeah, I could encounter a problem, and it will cost to replace parts and things like that. That is a possibility, and I know that some people have experienced that. So I don't want to discount some of those things, but by and large, for me, even though it doesn't hit all of the check marks when it comes to return on investment, there's a million other reasons why I absolutely love my freeze dryer and why I will always keep one in my house from here on out. So let's hope that the prices of these freeze dryers keep going down as they become more and more popular. If you have been on the fence and this one made you decide that you want to get a freeze dryer, make sure to head down into the description and use my link. It won't cost you a thing, but it will give a little bit back to the channel. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. We got our inventory done. We got everything put back up. Happy preserving, guys.